Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, and welcome to our bi-weekly webinar series. Today we are going to talk about setting up sales tax in order time. Plus, we're also going to discuss a new feature that we recently added that can leverage some of the information that or some of the taxes, what's been happening, in terms of the whole tax world. So what's happening in terms of the whole tax world is that more and more tax jurisdictions are wanting to tax web orders that get shipped to their state, regardless of the originating vendor. So, in the old days when you had a store, someone would walk into a store, it was a physical location, they would buy the tax, they would buy the items and pay the tax, and off you go. However, in the modern day of e-commerce, the whole idea of taxes have become a little bit more complicated because of the whole multi-jurisdictional tax. I'm going to go through a couple of, I'm going to have the example with our QuickBooks desktop version, although that can also apply to QuickBooks Online with a couple of exceptions. So when we set up a customer, you're going to set up a customer, and we want set up a name or whatever, and then we go to the defaults tab. There are two things that are here. One of them is what's called the tax code, and simply the tax code would indicate whether you want to tax the customer or not. And you can create more tax codes, but generally all you need is non-tax or tax. Let's assume that this customer is tax. And then in the typical way of setting it up, you would create one or more tax items that would provide you with how much the rate is. So if I go into QuickBooks here, I have Florida State as 7%, and we also have Florida Dade, all right, which is a combination of Dade and Florida State. This is called the group tax. So the Florida State is a single tax, what we call the single tax, and the Florida Dade is a combination of the Dade tax, which is 1.5%, and the Florida State, to give us a total of 8.25, although that's incorrect. That was just an example. We also mirror those tax rates if you're using QuickBooks Desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick Florida Dade, okay, and creating that. Now you can see that if I have a lot of jurisdictions, and though those jurisdictions change a lot, I would have to create a tremendous amount of item sales tax for potentially each combination of jurisdiction. And Florida is actually a simple state, but if you get into states like California, you might have a state tax, a county tax, and a local tax that might even differ slightly from zip to zip. So that becomes very cumbersome to do. So what we've come up with, especially if you're doing a lot of e-commerce sales, what we wanted to come up with was a way that you can do the sales tax really, even though you still have to put in you know, what the tax, you know, whether they're taxable and their tax item, the actual rate will not be based on what the database says, but actually based on the zip code, and primarily the ship to zip code, because that's really where how the tax rates are based. In order to enable that, we go into our preferences. All right, and I'm going to go to company preferences, and I'm going to go to sales here, and I'm going to click on advanced, and I'm going to check this box: calculate tax rates based on zip code instead of item sales tax. Okay. Very simple. So in a sense, when I select this calculate sales tax based on zip code instead of item sales tax, we basically ignore what rate is on what rate would be on the item sales tax. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to the item sales tax profile list, and so it would ignore you know, this tax, which is clearly wrong anyway. All right, so I created this customer called Morrison, and let's go ahead and add a sales order. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and put in that. And as you can see, we can see that the Florida date in the database was supposed to be 8.5%. Right? Remember, the item sales tax for Florida date was supposed to be 8.5%, but it did a zip code lookup based on the zip code, and it found that the rate was in fact 7%. And that gives you the opportunity to actually edit that and have much more flexibility, especially when you're dealing with e-commerce orders. You don't have to worry about creating a new sales tax item for every combination of zip code, county, and jurisdiction and local. You can just have one item sales tax and allow order time to determine what the proper rate is. Now, also importantly, is the concept of, and I forgot my my items here. Okay, so this is one of my items, and we're going to add that. Importantly, also, you want to make your items taxable. So your products are also going to be all taxable. If a customer is not taxable, it'll change this automatically, this tax code, to a non. So the rule is that the customer tax code overrides the item tax code. The customer tax code overrides the item tax code. So when you set up your items, generally products which may have tax or may not have tax depending on the type of customer, you would set all the tax codes in that regard to tax. And then services, generally services are not taxed, and so you would set those to none. Now, with regard to QuickBooks Online, it's this whole structure, really you don't have to do anything with QuickBooks Online, because QuickBooks Online allows us to override the tax rate. Okay, QuickBooks Online allows us to override the tax rates and just put in whatever we see here. But with QuickBooks Desktop, it's a little bit more stringent. So what we need to do is we need to give QuickBooks Desktop a little bit more information, So if we look at an invoice in QuickBooks, and we'll just go quickly look at that. So here we have a situation where, let me find another item here with a little bit more dollars. So this one we're using the Georgia sales tax. Here's the tax code. Remember the non-tax and the tax, and here's the tax code. But it's impossible for us to override this. It's impossible. There's no way that we can override this. So what should be here is a zero rated tax, okay? And then we need to put in here GA and the gross tax rate, okay? That's the way we have to do it. And in order to do that, we need to know what this is. We need to know what this is. So in order to do that, now this could be the, if you have Avalara, this zero rated tax would be the Avalara tax item code that you would be setting up. Avalara actually has you set up one of these tax codes, or tax jar, or whatever. It's the same idea. So I'm going to go and show you how to kind of set that up. So we go into our accounting integration, and when I have that lookup mode enabled, I see a new preference in my invoices section of my accounting integration. This is only for QuickBooks Desktop. Like I said, for QuickBooks Online, we do not have to worry about this type of thing because internally they do it. So here I would select my zero, so it says select a zero rated tax to assign to the main item sales tax area in the QuickBooks and post it to invoice QuickBooks. So it's a long way of saying is put that in here, okay? So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and save. So that's what I would do. That's the way to configure when you're using the tax lookup mode. In other words, we ignore the rate on the item sales tax, and we go use the zip code of the shipping address. Okay, if there's no zip code, there's no tax. We use the zip code of the shipping address to determine what that tax rate is based on the zip code. And then when we post to QuickBooks, we cannot have it where QuickBooks assigns this tax code. We have to do it where it does it like this, where it's a zero rated over here like so, and over here it actually calculates the rate. So let's go ahead and complete that example. Okay, so here again we're not using the 8.5%. We're going to go ahead and approve this order. We're going to go ahead and create our shipping document. Okay, we can see that tax rate got copied and mark that as shipped. All right. So now we're going to go to our accounting integration, and I'm going to go ahead and start the sync job here. Okay. So by the way, this little thing here basically is if I press start now, it'll go and check right away for a new sync job. All right, so the sync job was found. Okay. So as we're doing that, let's see if we can have any. Okay, so one of the questions was, how will this work with Avalara? So I mentioned that it's all about the zero rated tax. So that key preference over here, when you configure, I'm not going to be able to configure, but you're gonna assign the Avalara tax, which is a zero rated tax, the item sales tax that Avalara creates, to be that preference. We're just waiting until that that gets finished there. All right, so there it is. So notice how the tax gets posted up here as opposed to down here. All righty. So that would, okay, the answer to your question is no, you do not need. So the question was, do you need to update all the customers? Do you need to update all the customers with the new tax, Avalara tax rate? The answer is no. You do not need it. That will be swapped out by Avalara. So the way they track that is, well, they'll keep track of it. But you do not need to change any of the customer tax codes to the Avalara tax code. Just leave the tax code as is, and all you have to worry about is two things. One is the company preference to change that sales under advance to calculate tax based on zip code instead of item sales tax. That's one. And if you're using QuickBooks desktop, then you need to go into accounting integration, configure, invoices, and select the zero rated tax or the Avalara tax. And it should work. Okay. So that was a pretty straightforward webinar, a little tricky. Remember when you set up your items, so just to review, you want to set up your customers under default with the tax code, whether they're taxable or non, with an item sales tax. Okay. You want to set up your items that they have either a taxable or a non-taxable. All right. Now, if they're a product, generally you're going to have tax. All right. If they're in, if they're a service, generally you're going to have a non-tax. Of course, shipping is a little, some states tax shipping, some states don't. So that's the way. And then the customer tax rate kind of supersedes, or the customer tax code supersedes the item code. So if the customer is not taxable, even though the item is taxable, there's no tax going to be charged. Okay, so that's the point. Very important. Is there any other questions on tax? So if you have your e-commerce integration set up where you're getting a lot of multi-jurisdictional, you're using Shopify, they calculate the tax. What we'll do, you should turn on the lookup mode, and whatever taxes that they pass to us, we're going to use that exact tax rate. Let's say Shopify or BigCommerce or one of the other integrations we have. They will calculate the tax on their end, and we'll just use that tax rate. But you got to make sure that you flip that preference. So certainly, if you're using, if you have an e-commerce business, you should do this here right away. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, we're going to conclude. I'd like to thank you for participating in this webinar. If you have any ideas for future webinars, feel free to contact us at support@ordertime.com, or you can contact Michael DeFelice directly. Michael's a marketing supervisor at michael@ordertime.com. Anything else, Michael?
Nope, that pretty much covers it all.
Alrighty. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.